There is no money backing that scheme. The government cannot afford to do it.
But even in the private sector, I didn't know where the money was. In my head, it was with legal in general, but actually it wasn't. It was invested in companies and invested in whatever. And if those companies go bust, you lose your pension.
The entire pension industry is an industry where everything is built to sell, but not necessarily for the best interest of the people owning them.
One of the things I noticed when I spoke to my colleagues about this, they just assumed that this money was going into a central pot that was just there for them to have when they're retired. It actually turns out, this money is being used, it's being invested, it's going out into the world, right? It's not necessarily going to be there. There's a real lack of education.
Check this out, because this can be a game changer, not just for your life, but the lives of the next generation.
Hello there and welcome back to the Progressive Property YouTube. And today we are joined by an amazing guest and he's joining us virtually. This is Kevin Whelan and he's an economist, author and the founder of WealthBuilders, one of the UK's leading experts and authorities on SSAS pensions. Kevin is the only Progressive approved partner for all pension matters in the UK and he's helped raise hundreds of millions in private finance, including helping hundreds of members within the Progressive property community. So if you're a property professional, you will run out of money before you run out of deals, and Kevin Whelan is going to show you how to find new sources of money for your property deals. Let's dive right in. So Kevin, you are one of the biggest SSAS experts in the UK. Tell us a little bit about SSAS. What does it actually mean?
Oh, it's one of those awkward bits of language. You know how whenever you're building wealth, Sean, you get to speak to people and they give you new bits of language, whether it's HMO, service accommodation, whatever. Well, this is just a piece of language, but it's so useful. So SSAS, got nothing to do with the armed forces, nothing to do with software as a service. It's got everything to do with control, collaboration and creativity. And I know you guys at Progressive are all up for all of those things, giving people control, working in groups together to collaborate, and creativity. Well, I think you've got the master of creativity right by your side. And SSAS is a way. It's called a small self-administered scheme. Basically, it's a tax-free trust fund, separate legal entity for people who are a bit fed up with their old pensions and want to turn them into something that can give them all the control they need and do something about this terrible, terrible pension whammy that's coming just down the track, which I'm sure would be very useful to share.
Absolutely. Rachel Thieves is at it again, isn't she?
Yeah.
But before we go into the ins and outs of how the inheritance tax changes might impact pensions, there might be some people out there who don't really know much about their own pensions and don't really know what kind of controls they can have with a SSAS. So can you give us an overview of what that actually looks like in practice?
Yeah, I mean, if you were to break down the whole pension landscape, you've kind of got three things. One is what we call the defined benefit, which is money that's going to be paid to you just for surviving. And that's people who work for the civil service, teachers, if I might add, Sean, from your past experience, where you don't have an investment, you have a benefit. Well, they're not affected by inheritance tax and you got zero control at all. So the mainstay beyond that are what we call money purchase pensions. In other words, you got money in a pot and you know that because you get a statement or you get an online platform and your money's gone up, your money's gone down, or the money's gone around and instead exactly the same. But either way, you've got the responsibility for that money. And the only control you've really got is how many pots have you got, because usually they tend to be created by workplaces in the main, and also the fees you pay, because you have so little control as to what you can invest in. Because the whole principle of these type of pensions, and most people have got them, personal pensions, SIPs, those sorts of things, because it's limited to just the stock market, you can't really use your interest in property or business or crypto or gold or anything that would appeal to you or anything that you want to be interested in the future. You've got no scope. So the entire pension industry is an industry where everything is built to sell. So everything is sold, but not necessarily for the best interest of the people owning them. And in fact, as I'm an expert in SaaS, I'm also an expert in recurring income. And one of the shockers that people sometimes get when they talk to me, Sean, is the fact that the biggest recurring income, well, the two biggest sources of recurring income are leaving their life. One, taxes, and we'll hopefully talk about IHT as well. Secondly, fees that are going out to support an industry where the economies of scale brought by AI and fund management just are not passed on. So consequently, what the SaaS does is gives you as the business owner, have to be a business owner, not an employee, not self-employed, have to have a limited company, gives you complete control over what you decide to do with your pension. And that doesn't mean control over administration, compliance, and all of the routine stuff that you see other people do. That's taken care of, that's delegated. But the responsibility to direct your own money, like the director of a limited company, allows you to decide, what do I want my money to do? Do I want it in property? Do I want it in commercial property? And any other thing that can come up. So if you've got that control, you can bring that creativity to bear. And I'm more than happy to explain some ways that some very smart people, including Mr. McDonald next to you, has done some amazing things when he discovered for himself just a few years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And do you know what I find really fascinating about what you're saying? You mentioned I was a school teacher before, right? And we were automatically enrolled into this pension scheme. And one of the things I noticed when I spoke to my colleagues about this was they just assumed that this money was going into a central pot that was just there for them to have when they retired. But then, it actually turns out, this money is being used, it's being invested, it's going out into the world, right? And it's not necessarily going to be there when they need it. And I think there's a real lack of education.
It's more of a promise, isn't it? A government pension is more of a promise if you're in the public sector, right? There's nothing actually there. You can't open up like with my SSAS, I can open up my account and see how much is there. With a public sector pension, it's like, I think I have something at retirement.
Yeah, or I hope I have something at retirement. And, what's really interesting is I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but, if, I have a standard teacher pension scheme, for example, I can't access those funds to invest, for example, into some of the things that you're talking about. And I have to wait until much later on.
That's a great point. First of all, absolutely. If you were to have 100 civil servants in a room, they probably none of them would know that there is no money backing that scheme. The entire future pension payments for the public sector is driven by future taxpayers, of which they're so heavily taxed now, and there are less of them than ever before. As an economist, it's my background, we call this sort of big picture thing macro economics. And the big picture macro is the government cannot afford to do it. So it has to have a consequence somewhere. The state pension will change, and the way public sector pensions are provided will change. So future people will probably get less. State pension will go further out. And this triple lock that they've sort of backed themselves into a corner to say we need to provide this because it's a manifesto pledge, that's going to be gone at some point. And they'll just have to go. And what I'd be respectful of if a government that said, hey, we got a problem. We got to deal with this in the big picture, but they don't. They see 4 years or 5 years at a time, and they just look for power. They don't look to solve the problem. And that's a problem that is not going to go away.
But for anybody watching this, whether in public sector or private sector, it's almost like that promise of future money from future taxpayers. Private sector, I was in the private sector, and my pension was with a company called Legal & General. And I used to make a pension contribution through my salary, and my company would do a contribution. So I was putting in about 6%, they'd put in 9%. And it comes back to something called control. I had zero control of where that money was. So you said that as a teacher, you didn't know where the money was in the public sector, but even in the private sector, I didn't know where the money was. In my head, it was with Legal & General, but actually it wasn't. It was invested in companies and invested in whatever. And if those companies go bust, you lose your pension, it goes down in value. So public sector, they get it out of future taxpayer. Private sector, you got your pension, but if it's invested badly by the broker who looks after it, it could go to zero, well, at least in the public sector, you've got something. So both are hugely risky in my eyes. Well, the reason I set up a SSAS in 2016, I applied for it, got it set up around 2017, was because I could take back control. Now I knew what it was put into. The great thing about property, I'd like to touch on, Kevin, as well, if you could, is obviously as a property investor, you mentioned about you have to have a limited company. But we're not talking like, a supermarket or a hairdresser's or some type of company. We're talking about you could have a job, whether it be a school teacher in the public sector or any public sector job. You could have a private sector job, but you could have a property limited company that you're doing your buy-to-lets in, and you can set up a SSAS through that limited company.
Exactly right. And there's been, I suppose the domain of SSAS, they were created in 1973. So it's not like it's something new. They've been going for decades. The small number of people who took them up was really because historically, it was the limited company owner who wanted to buy their commercial property, the business that they're in. So instead of paying rent to a third party, they'd buy the building and pay rent to themselves. Very smart. But as we've seen more smart people kind of discover that SSAS doesn't just do that, because there's been a proliferation of people in property setting up limited companies since government intervention, Section 24 and all that, it's meant there's been a massive groundswell of property people learning that, hey, I can take my old pension that I have no control, bring it under my own family's control, because a SSAS can hold up to 11 people, you plus 10. No, mostly that doesn't happen. Kevin and his wife, right? Me and my wife and 3 grown-up kids. It's in that sort of, but it's truly family intergenerational planning that in a conventional pension, it's for one. So your pension is for one. Your teacher's pension is for one. It's not a family thing. So it changes the dynamic, not just in what you can do, but who you can collaborate with, who you can share with, who you can involve. And I think what I've discovered is when people get it, they see the power behind it, but the power is for them. There's not me coming up saying, you should invest in this or you should invest in that. All I'm doing really is being a clarion call, a beacon to say to people, check this out, because this can be a game changer, not just for your life, but the lives of the next generation, because all the evidence is, and the combination of poor knowledge of pensions and poor knowledge of inheritance tax is pretty much all estates, all people who die, their money gets dissipated and spent within 2 generations, and it's gone. Whereas the SSAS is a trust fund, but it doesn't die, so it can keep going, which means the family start to learn about things, and then they start to develop almost a plan that can be financially bulletproof for the family for decades and decades and decades to come, rather than dying with the person. It can keep going to support future generations and future generations beyond that. And that's what I love about it.
And I think the key message as well for anybody listening to this and you're thinking, oh, this isn't really for me, I don't have a pension, or I have a public sector pension, or I have a private sector pension. If you are listening to this and you're interested in property, you should be buying property ideally within a limited company because of Section 24 tax. And if you're buying property in a limited company, even if you have a job in the private or public sector, you have a limited company, which means you qualify for a SSAS.
Yeah, and I totally identify and relate to what you're saying about, people who are now getting new into property, and because of Section 24 changing everything, more property investors setting up limited companies. It's so fascinating, isn't it? Because people don't realize the money's not there. It doesn't exist. It's not there. And that's why setting up a limited company and getting involved in a SSAS thing to give you that control, because then you're in control of this pot of money, right? And you can do stuff with it. What can you do with it?
Well, I suppose, we're talking to you guys who are experts in property, and property, you can speak volumes about the benefits of property compared to traditional stock market investing. But the sorts of things people can do breaks down into 3 main areas, right? So, and it depends what your objectives are. So if you're wanting to build your pot, so you want to grow your pension pot for the future, and that's your plan, then you can buy property assets inside the pension. So commercial assets, commercial to residential assets, land, care homes, children's homes, pretty much any type of property except residential. That doesn't mean you can't get residential in the SSAS, but not if you're trying to hold it in the pot to serve you for the future. And we know that residential property is popular and commercial property too. So for those who want to do residential property, SSAS and only SSAS, no SIP, no personal pension, definitely not your teacher's pension, because you've got no control, allows you to borrow up to 50% of that pot and lend it to yourself. Now remember, the pot isn't just limited to the pot you've got, because you can collaborate with spouses, family members, business partners, joint venture partners. So you put a number of pots together, you got more buying power, which means you've got more deal-making creativity at your disposal. And in addition, you've got a bigger pot to lend just 50% to. So, if you lend 50%, and here's a question. So, Kevin's got a big pot, I've got a big pot. Let's say, for the sake of an argument, where we're talking about a big pot, which was £1 million. How much money can I lend to myself? £500,000. What can I do to that? It's with my limited company. What can I do with that? Anything my limited company does. So if I've got a limited company that's set up to do property and residential property or student HMOs or whatever type of property you want to buy, you can use the money in your pension. Now think about that. When you talked about your pension a minute ago, you were talking about you can't touch it till you get to a certain retirement age. And looking at you now, you've got a fresh face, not an old.
He's older than me.
He wishes.
Well, that's fair enough. But when you get older, your focus is different. But the point being is, younger people over anybody can get access today. So you're not waiting till you're 55, or the rules are changing to 57 in a couple of years' time, and then it'll be 60 before you can touch your pension and so on. That's going to keep going back and back and back, just like the state pension is.
And this is a total game changer for someone like me who's thinking about, like, how do I access this money now when I'm so young and fresh, and I'll be able to use it to build up my business, right?
And you build wealth today. You're not building wealth in your pension. You're building wealth outside of your pension.
I want to know in the comments, first of all, if you think, as listeners, Sean looks young and fresh. Just let me know in the comments, please.
And I know, and I want you to also write in the comments whether you think Kevin looks young and fresh.
That's easy.
Let's see who the battle of the young and fresh wins.
When I was young and fresh, here's what I did do. I did exactly what Kevin did. I met Kevin probably 2016 time.
2016.
Yeah, and I heard about SSAS, and I decided I was going to set up a SSAS pension. And I spoke to Legal and General, who was my provider, and they said you can't do that. And I spoke to Lang O'Rourke, who was the employer, and I was leaving the job, I finished the job, but they had been the employer that built it up over 10 plus years, so over a decade work, and it went to 134 grand. I didn't even know it was worth 134 grand.
So you had 134 grand in your pension?
Didn't know, but I knew I had a pension, but I said to Legal and General I'd like to put in a SSAS. They said you can't. I spoke to Lang O'Rourke. I said, I want to put my pension in a SSAS. They said you can't. So I spoke to Kevin at WealthBuilders and gave them authority to speak to Lang O'Rourke and Legal and General, and it got done.
Amazing. It comes down, doesn't it, to be careful who you get your advice from, right?
Exactly. So I needed a transfer value. So when they got the transfer value, it was 134 grand. That 134 grand in 2017, by the time it transferred in, just the end of 16, beginning of 17, 8 years later, has just crossed $1 million. So it's just over 1.1 million.
1.1 million. How did you do it?
Property.
Would you say that's like the biggest benefit? I mean, how did you grow that?
So I only use it for property, but if you think you're trying to buy a property and you have no money, well, you become your own bridging lender, because I can lend 50% of the pot to myself. So when it was 134 grand, I could lend 70 myself, which wasn't huge, but I could lend 100% to somebody else. So I could either be my own bridging lender or be somebody else's bridging lender. So at the start, I just lent it out to other people. But then when I was making profit in my company, I could put that profit into the SSAS and pay no tax, because a pension contribution is tax deductible up to 60k a year. See, per person. So 60 for me, 60 for my wife, 120 grand a year saves you 30 grand tax. Now, I've not put 120 grand a year in each year, but yeah, I have the ability to. However, I could lend it to other people at 1% a month. So now you become a bridging lender. or I can lend 50% to myself. So as it's grown over $1 million, I can now lend $500,000 to myself and $500,000 to other people. Now, when I say myself, as Kevin mentioned, my limited company. So what I do is I lend 50% of my pot to my limited company, and I do buy, refurbish, rent, refinance. So rather than borrowing off a bridging lender, paying big bridging fees and everything else and interest, my limited company is borrowing off my SSAS. I don't have the big bridging fees and the valuations and all this stuff. My pension charges my limited company, 1% a month. So I'm paying money into the pension, which is tax-free to the pension and tax deductible to my company. I do buy, refurbish, rent, refinance on single lets, HMOs, normal residential property. Pay that money back into the SSAS. And you can either do it over 12 months on a bridge, or I can do it over up to maximum 5 years. And the other half of my pot, I could do gold or crypto or whatever, but I actually lend it to other people. So, for instance, you don't have a SSAS, but have you ever borrowed money from a SSAS?
Absolutely. And again, a game changer for people who would like to borrow money from investors, because you have to lend 50% of your SSAS, right? If you want to grow that 50%.
When you borrowed money from a SSAS, you didn't borrow it from my SSAS, but how did you get connected with the person whose SSAS you borrowed money off?
So I got connected to that person through you, actually.
For me. Because I have a SSAS, I know other people at Progressive with SSAS. You watch this podcast, but you never come here. You never come and learn here. But actually, it's not just about the learning, it's about the connection. Because I know 100 plus people with SSASs. And if each one of them only had a couple of $100,000, that's millions and millions of pounds. And here's the thing, I cannot lend all of my money in my SSAS to myself. I can only lend 50% to myself, which means the other 50% I have to lend to other people. But I learned how to do this through Kevin Whelan and setting it all up. Corporate job for 10 plus years. I was in my mid-30s. I didn't have a clue this thing existed. And in the last 8 years, I built up £1 million plus pot. I started with 134 grand. It's at just over 1.1 million. So it's gone up £1 million in 8 years through a SSAS. I just can't recommend it enough.
Imagine growing your pot up to £1 million in over 8 years. And Kevin, is this something that you see sort of replicated across the industry, or are lots of people doing this?
Those people who take it and really realize that there's power inside that money, and then they decide to use it. If you think about the difference between most people, how many hours a month or a year even do they spend when they get their pension statement? Normally it's probably like Kevin was, gets the statement, has a look at it, wished it were better, put it back in a drawer or a filing cabinet or something, and then that's it for the year. Whereas now you see this as fuel for your wealth journey. So if you're focused on your wealth journey, all it's doing is giving you more fuel to fuel your ambition to build your wealth, not just for yourself, but your wealth for your family as well. It's almost as simple as, if the government, the government are always changing things, aren't they? We know that. But if they turned around, Rachel Thieves, I get that. But let's say another government came in 5 years' time, right, and went, you know what? Pensions are just a pain in the arse for everybody. Let's just give you all the money that you've got in your pension pot. Have it. Just act responsibly with it and build your wealth. Would you, A, take that money, give it back to whoever it was with, or B, use that money and say, well, that's cash. I can use that and build my wealth with it. And that's what people do with SSAS, because it becomes proximate. It becomes relevant. As Kevin said, it's about control, collaboration with others, creativity. And they're the three key points that SSAS can bring. But in order to do that, you've got to take responsibility. And some people are willing to grasp that money and say, with a little bit of guidance, it doesn't take a lot. I'm not in Kevin's life anymore. We set it up and he's running it, right? We're not involved. It's a vehicle, high-powered vehicle, need a bit of instruction. Once you've got it, you crack on. And that's why, I would commend it to anybody who's got ambition. If you're happy poodling along with your money in your pension pot, well, leave it. But could you have turned 134 grand into $1 million plus in 8 years in the stock market? No chance. Not at all. None at all. So therefore, it's an accelerator for your wealth, provided you're willing to take the responsibility. So it's not for everyone. You need a limited company. You need a decent pot, or combining with other people, you need a decent pot. Ideally, 100 grand is good. 50 grand's worth a conversation, but 100 grand is good. And as Kevin said, that collaboration, that you've got your own money, You could put some of the money in the stock market and diversify, or you can become a bank. And I lend my money too, and I enjoy being a bank and lending it to others because I get to see and collaborate with some great people, and I get a decent return, and I know they get a decent return. And I think there's a lot of value in this, and definitely worth someone writing that down and say, I'm going to find out a little bit more about this, because in my enthusiasm and Kevin's enthusiasm, both the SaaS owners, we could easily lose somebody and go, oh, this all sounds too complicated, but it isn't. It's just your money doing what you want it to.
I think that's the most key thing, is it's actually really simple to set up, but people just have a blocker to it, go, no, but they don't even try to understand it. And what a lot of people don't understand the difference between a public sector pension and a private sector pension. A lot of people have never heard of a SSAS. There'll be people listening to this now and you've never heard of a SSAS. You need to reach out and find out what it's about. But then there'll be some that have. And I meet so many people, Kevin, and they say, oh yeah, I've heard of a SSAS, but you can only buy commercial property within it. No, that's incorrect. If you have a SIP, you can only buy commercial property within it. If you have a SSAS, you can only buy commercial property within it, but you can do a loan back for 50% of your pot to your limited company and buy residential, single-let, buy-to-lets, etc. within the limited company. And that's the big difference between a SAP and a SIP, I guess, Kevin, is it?
Yeah, it is one of them, but I'll just pick on one point, which is those people who do buy commercial property inside can also then turn that commercial property into residential property separately. So they could buy a shop with storage units up above. Then the pension then owns the downstairs, the commercial bit, and you get to own the upstairs. So it can facilitate your ownership through the buying strategy. But it's you got to learn these things. Like anything, that creativity comes from learning from others who've got that creativity and who teach you. And one of the things I think we know in the world of property and wealth building is it's a very sharing and caring community. And people share stuff. It's not like they're hiding their homework from you. Go, I'm not going to show you that. It's all about sharing. And that's why I love to do it. And that's why I love working with you guys.
And by the way, Kevin, if you think I've got my pension pot and it's too small to buy a property within it, a commercial property, can the SSAS buy a commercial property and borrow money against as well as using your money in your pot? Can they borrow money as well against the property? Can the SSAS take a mortgage?
You can. So we're going a step further here. So we're not just talking about now. If you just think what we said, right? And geez, it's mind blowing. So Kevin's saying on the one hand, he can lend up to $500,000 to himself, no underwriting, right? No fees, and he can do what he wants with the money, right? He can use, and if he wants to do that, he can do that. If he wants to use the other money to buy commercial units or lend, you can do that. But you can also go to a bank. So if you want to buy a commercial unit, and if you've got, let's say people don't have, £1 million, but they've got 200 grand, they could borrow another 100 grand from a bank, because a bank will lend the separate legal entity called a SSAS money to buy a piece of property. Now, if Kevin had phoned up Legal and General a few years ago and said, will you let me borrow a 50% more to buy more stocks and shares? They go, hey, Kevin, you having a moment here? You can't do it. But if you phone up and say, I'd like to buy this commercial property, will you lend me money towards it secured on the property? The answer is yes. The pension law limits you to 50% of the value of your pension. So if your value of your pension, in Kevin's case, say is $1 million, he can borrow up to $500,000. Right?
Can I share my other favorite thing as well?
Yeah, go for it.
When my pension was with Legal and General, it was around 1.5% or 2% fee a year. Let's call it 1.5% every year. So on the 134 grand, not a genius at maths, but 1% is what, 1,300 quid. Let's say it's 2 grand a year fees on 134k. When I transferred my pension to a SSAS, there's an annual administration fee, which is, there'll be different depending on what SSAS provider, but it's 1,250 quid plus VAT. That 1,250 quid plus VAT, they can invoice the trustee of your company, of the SSAS, which is the limited company. So the limited company can pay the 1,250 quid plus VAT, and they can tax deduct the VAT and claim it back. Should it tax deduct the whole amount, but claim the VAT back if it's a vatable company. So then the SSAS isn't paying any of that fee. But more importantly, that's an annual fee. So if I had £1 million with Legal and General today, I would be paying 1.5% minimum fee, if not 2%, which would be 15 to 20 grand a year fee. I'm paying £1,250 plus VAT.
And it's tax deductible.
The fee is the same no matter what size the pot. That is huge.
Yeah, do you know what? And I'm loving the whole tax efficiency of this whole thing. I mean, the tax benefits to this are all amazing. But as you alluded to earlier, there are going to be some new IHT rules coming in from our, the powers that be, right? So how's that going to work? I understand that, from 2027, pensions left when you die may count towards inheritance tax, right?
No, it's not a may, it will. It's not a proposal, it's coming, right? It's a big issue. And what's weird to me, and I'll describe how SSAS can help with that, is I hear people say to me, oh, inheritance tax is changing, I don't think I'll do a SSAS. Well, aren't you interested in building your wealth? And then if you've got more wealth, you might end up paying more inheritance tax in the end, or your family will. But it's a bit like having a job. You got a job for 100 grand and your boss goes, hey, Kevin, I'd like to pay you 200 grand for the same job. And you go, nah, I'll stick with 100 grand because I'll pay less tax. It's nuts. People can make very, very strange decisions based on things they think they know, but they don't know. In fact, probably one of my jobs in a working month, and I will get to IHT, is to correct what people send me that ChatGPT said their SSAS can do. Just wrong. So because it's complex, it's wrong, because they're getting their source material from SIPs and from kind of SaaS companies that don't do anything remotely creative or collaborative at all. Anyway, inheritance tax, right? It is the most hated tax in the whole of the UK, right? It's a tax on death, but it's a tax on capital. It's not a tax on income. So if you've got a teacher's pension, that will never be subject to inheritance tax. Not a reason to keep it though, but you can't do anything about it, so there you go. No tax on income. It's a tax on the capital transfer on death. No inheritance tax to pay between spouses. It's only on second death. Okay. So why is that a big deal? Well, when people think about the tax on inheritance, which is 40% of the value over a free limit. So just like when you got a job, you've got give or take 12 grand before you pay tax. It's called an income tax allowance. You've got an inheritance tax allowance. You've got two of them. The first one is every individual has got 325,000 tax-free. So if their estate, in other words, everything they own minus everything they owe, is greater than 325, there's a potential tax on that. But spouse has got 325. So if you've got a husband and wife, husband dies before the wife, that's usually the case, just the age difference normally, 650, two lots of 325, then become completely tax-free for the whole value of the estate for the next generation to consider. In addition, right, so you've got two lots of 325. If you live in a home, you're not renting a home, you live in one, and you're leaving that home to the next generation, your direct descendants is called, children or grandchildren. If you don't have kids, by the way, you're hammered, because you don't get that extra allowance. So if you add 325 plus 175 for the house allowance, called a boring title, residence nil rate band. So we got a nil rate band and a resident nil rate band. 325 plus 175 per person is 500. Two lots of 500, 1 million. So in other words then, if I'm looking at someone's assets, their estate in other words, if their assets are more than 1 million, next generation are going to pay tax on it. Now, up until now, because pensions are still inheritance tax free now, but from April 2027, if young, fresh-looking Kevin keels over and £1 million gets paid to his wife, no inheritance tax. But when she dies, all of that money is going to scoosh up or bolster the value of his estate, whereas now it wouldn't count in his estate. So what would count in his estate is any assets he owns, property and other assets, minus any mortgages equals your net estate. And it's on that you pay inheritance tax. So you can see that anybody who's got a reasonable pension pot, the pension is going to shunt the value of their estate, and therefore that money is going to be potentially chargeable to inheritance tax. So, at 40%. And people like me, north of seven figures like Kevin, I've worked a long time for this. I've actually worked longer on my SSAS than Kevin has. He's done a better job to build his up quicker than I built it up. But nonetheless, the point is I've worked bloody hard to do this. And then they change because they back themselves into a corner with their policy mandate saying we can't increase a penny in the pound on income tax. We can't increase national insurance, except if you're an employer, they do. We won't increase it for people, and we won't change the pensions triple lock, and we won't change VAT. Where's the money going to come from? Answer, 50 billion black hole, anywhere they bloody well can. And so property owners are a soft touch, business owners are a soft touch, now pensions owners are the soft touch. So the triple whammy bashing, and I spend my time dealing with property owners, business owners, and pension owners and saying, right, let's get to grips with this problem and have a plan that pays less inheritance tax. And what's great about SSAS is there are at least 3 things you can do that can help you. So, it's just a huge issue, and I hate the way they've just introduced it. And there's another bad issue, but I know Kevin wanted to say something there.
I was going to say, are you going to share the 3 issues with us, the 3 ways?
Yeah, only if you ask me.
Yes, but before I ask you, and you tell me the 3 ways, I made a decision when all this was introduced by Rachel Thieves and the government. I was thinking, I heard all of this noise about you can't have a SSAS now, the benefit of a SSAS is gone. And I looked at it in another way before you introduce your 3, is if we made 120 grand, as an example, 160 grand per person, a husband and wife, if you made 120 grand contribution to your SSAS each year, that is now taxable because all pensions are taxable. By the way, your current private pension's taxable too. It doesn't matter. It's not just the SSAS that's taxable. Pensions are taxable. Yeah. So if you private pensions in some company you don't know it's in, you don't know it's in. But if I leave the 120 grand in my company, so I don't end up having it in a pension where I'll be taxed in the future, well, I'm going to pay 25% corporation tax today. So I'll pay £30,000 tax on my 120 today, rather than put the whole 120 into the company now. I don't pay that 30 grand tax today. In 5 or 6 or 10 years' time, if, I don't know, Love or Hate 'em Reform or somebody gets in, then they might change the system again and go back to no tax on it. So I'd rather not pay the 30 grand now and put it into the pension. But on top of that, if I pay the 30 grand tax now, I got 90 grand left. If I put the whole 120 into my pension, I keep the whole 120. I can now invest that and I can leverage it. So I can leverage 120 instead of leverage 90. And if I can get a buy, refurbish, rent, refinance, if I can lend it back to myself, lend it to other people, lending that 30k to other people, and it's 30k a year, if I can lend that money that I'd otherwise have given to the government now, lend it to other people within my SSAS, or lend it to myself, I can make money with that money, and the money I make with that money, and the 30 originally that I didn't pay now, that will likely cover my entire children's inheritance tax bill in the future, just the profit on the money I'd otherwise have paid tax on today. Better pay it in the future than pay it today. Get it into your SSAS to protect it today, reduce your tax bill today, and then leverage it like crazy through assets. And the addition, I want to make my pot so damn big that if it's double the size it would otherwise have been, then even if they took half off me, before he even shares how they don't have to take the half off you, but even if they did, they're only taking the half that you grew from money you'd otherwise never have had anyway, because you leveraged it and you pushed it in there in the first place.
Isn't it amazing how a simplistic but focused thought gives you a different answer to know why bother having money in a pension pot? I mean, if you heard Kevin say, before we talked about inheritance tax, you heard him say 134 to 1 million, right? Again, if you had 100, I don't know how many people listen to the podcast, but let's imagine there are people listening and they could put a virtual hand up, right? Would you rather, A, have Kevin's pot of 134 left in the stock market at 6% with 2% charges, so net 4% per annum? Or would you rather £1 million? Vote now.
Do it in the
They'd have £1
comments.
million. They'd have £1 million, wouldn't they? Because £1 million gives you more control. Here's something else you could do, Kevin, before I give you the three. If you decided that you wanted to, you could calculate the difference between what you would have got in the stock market and what you get. You could take a very small portion of that money. Let's say you make 12% on your money instead of 4% on your money net, or even 5 or 6%. So you're doubling your return. You could take 1 or 2% of that, take it over here, buy an insurance policy that covers the value of the inheritance tax, right? And put it into trust so that your own wealth is protecting itself. And you can get the business to pay for it, so it's tax deductible. This creativity that is in your blood and my blood and insurance blood is not in the blood of everybody else. So rather than fear creativity, I'd say lean in towards it and find out a bit more. Rather than stay back in fear, I shouldn't have a SAS because, or my IFA has told me I should have a SIP, not a SAS, because he gets paid if you have one. You wouldn't get paid if you have a SAS. You wouldn't get the 20 grand a year, you get nothing, because if you've got a SAS, you don't need an IFA. Anyway.
That's really important, by the way, because I have so many people who speak to me and they say, the person who I've currently got my private pension with has advised me not to move it to a SAS because it wouldn't be right for me. Maybe it's because it wouldn't be right for them because they don't do SAS and they lose their percentages on your money. Just a thought.
Just a thought. I mean, there are some good advisors as well, right? So we don't want to tar all financial advisors with the same brush. But let me ask. Let me get this question out to you all. This is a thought. Let's say if I arrange 1,000 SSASs, how many of those have been a direct referral from a forward-thinking, client-focused IFA out of 1,000? What do you reckon, Sean?
Probably less than 50.
I'd say even less than that.
Zero.
Zero?
Absolutely zero. I've been doing this since 2009, the SAS thing, and I've never had a referral from an IFA since 2009. Not one. I don't even mean one. I mean not one.
That's mind-blowing.
That can't be right. See,
there's nothing in it for them, though. It makes sense because there's nothing in it for them.
Well, there can be if they were to say, hey, I can help you and I can help you structure some things. And also if they knew that because a SAS is collaborative, people put their children in it. And all the evidence is financially, when somebody dies, the children don't use the same IFA as the dad or the mum did. They get their own. Whereas if you built a SAS and you built a SAS with a collaboration of the children, you're part of their life, not apart from it. So it actually would serve a good IFA. But for some reason, it's not really on their radar. You want to know the 3 ways, yeah?
Yeah, go.
Okay. The first one is only in SAS, not in SIP, not in any other pension. You can create multi-members. And if you create multi-members, let's say 5, for example, then you've got 5 people in the trust fund. And you can cascade money from one person to the next. It's called earmarking. You can make decisions internally because you've got a group scheme as to how growth gets reallocated and redistributed, which means you're building the inheritance or the pot of the next generation, not you.
What age do you have to be to get into the SAS to do that?
18 years of age.
So the message here is get married young, get kids young, and get as many of them as possible.
Well, you could do that. you could do that. But anyway, that's way number 1. Okay, it's called earmarking, right? It's the cascading effect. It's gradual, but with life expectancy of 85 and more people, especially women living to 100, you've got lots of time if you create a plan and you start a plan now.
Just in logic, when you say cascading, just to break it down for Sean's Irish mind.
Northern Irish.
The money that's in, I'll use me and my wife as an example. I've got money in my pot. My wife's got money in her pot. When our children reach 18, they join the pension, the SSAS. We cannot put any money that's currently in our pots in theirs. But what we can do is the money that we lend out, any interest from that money could be cascaded into their pot. And any contributions we make, we can put into their pots first to build theirs up instead of putting it in ours. We only had 100 grand to put in. Rather than saying that's 25 grand per person, we'd put 50 in each of the children's pots when they're 18 and nothing in ours because they're part of our limited company and they're part of our SSAS. So we put it in their pot instead of our pot because that reduces the future inheritance tax they'll have and it moves it on a generation. Is that what you're saying?
You could do that. You're getting, by being very specific, it backs me in a bit of a corner to say whether you're right or wrong on the thought, and I don't want to do that. What I would say is contributions can be made to children's pension pots. You can pay any money into a child from the day they're born. You can pay 3,600 gross into a pension pot, even if they're one. The contribution made into children's names depends on the contribution they're making to the company because it's a company contribution. So you could make one of your children, which, will an AI champion for the business, right? Because they'll know everything and we'll know nothing. And as they get more sophisticated, you can then use that money to pay them. You definitely can do that. So that's no problem. That's not even, you could argue that's a way.
But they have to be 18.
They have to be 18. You can't have them in a SSAS until they're 18. But I'll try and give you a different example. In a SSAS, a big diverse pot, you wanted to allocate or make a decision for a specific investment that had growth and income, right? So you've got capital growth and income. You could earmark the growth or the capital income, depending on which one you wanted, to somebody else.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's as far as I could probably go.
Yeah.
On something that's
obviously, if anybody wants to know more about this stuff, they can reach out to you. How can they reach out?
Oh, definitely. We'll tell you how to do that, and I'll probably put together some kind of a resources thing as I listen to you guys and your questions. I'll think about that and I'll liaise with Sean. We'll just have to create a fancy name for it, but that's fine.
Right. So if anybody would like a resources document or something to tell you more about SSAS, just write resources in the chat, in the comments, and we'll get something to you because I'll hold Kevin to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So way number one, cascading, right? Earmarking. Way number two, you already know, which is the loan back. So if you take money as a loan back and you lend that, and you can attach more than one company to a SSAS. So you could have Kevin McDonald 1, Kevin McDonald 2. I know that's not the name of your company, but you know what I mean. And you could have, or in my case, which I don't have, I could have my WealthBuilders SSAS and my wheeling and dealing SSAS, right? And I could attach both. And in my wheeling and dealing, I could have all the wheelings. Okay, so I could make them alphabet share owners or just direct share owners and go, right, we're going to lend money to wheeling and dealing, buy an asset in wheeling and dealing, and the kids own most of the shares. Where's the growth and where's the asset going? Outside of the estate, right? Who knew? Right? People don't know this stuff, that you can grow your wealth where you want to.
You need to be 18 to have a SSAS. If you've got what's called alphabet shares, what age do you have to be given as a child to be given alphabet shares in a limited company? So like ABC shares where the parents are the A shareholder.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and it's one I'd have to go back and look at my notes because I'm not actually quite sure. It might be like a pension. You could be any age to be a shareholder, but there might be an age limit. I don't know the answer to that one.
It's a little bit younger than 18. It's either 12 or 16. Again, I need to check, but it's younger than 18. So it's definitely 16, and I think it could be 12. But again, I'll put it in the chat when we research it and check, but it could be 16.
Yeah, it's a valuable point. The third one is really more about, because you can involve children also at a younger age as well, as you mentioned, but in a SSAS specifically, which is a vehicle for investing, they become trustees, they start to assume a role of being a custodian instead of a consumer. They start to become responsible instead of irresponsible. They become involved instead of apart from it. So that participation with the next generation, which is great for property as well, because even little kids you can take to properties and I've seen pictures of you doing stuff, Kevin. There's loads of things you can do with children. But when they get to 18, you can even play Dragon's Den with them. Let's say, I said to Simon, who's actually a surveyor, my other son's a lawyer, and my daughter works for WealthBuilders, right? So they're all switched on people. But if I'd said to Holly, who's my eldest, hey, Holly, I'm not giving you the money, but inside the SSAS for me and your mum, we've got this much money, and we want to notionally allocate 100,000 for you to make a decision about how best you'd want to invest that on behalf of the whole family. And then you send them off to do their own research and participate in the whole wealth of the whole family. And for that reason, we do encourage all of our SSAS clients to name their SSAS something. So the SSAS becomes the family wealth plan. It's the start of the family wealth plan. So they call it, and our clients call all sorts of different names. So their company might be ABC Limited, but their SSAS is not called ABC Limited. Not normally. It's normally like Whelan Family Trust or McDonald Family Trust or whatever family trust or some other name that resonates with the whole family. And they start to build together a stewardship process, and then when we get to that point, we start teaching the family how to write family charters, which is the values, the principles on how they're going to perpetuate that money for generations to come, not be consumed within 1 or 2 generations. It's not for everyone, but it is for quite a few people, and that's why I take every opportunity I can to shout out about this message for those who feel like it resonates with them. So I appreciate it, gentlemen, that you've given me the opportunity to share it.
No, and we really appreciate you sharing it, because I know there will be people out there, by the way, who were listening to all of that conversation and they're kind of thinking, I didn't quite get that, and you might need to listen to the video a few times. But this is why it's so important to be around people like Kevin, to be around people like the other Kevin, people like you, so we can learn, how to do this stuff, and we can also avail of potentially, borrowing from people's SSASs who have them, and then we can build our own wealth and then create our own SSASs. And then I love what you were saying about, effectively training the future generations, with family generational wealth, because you said you can play at Dragon's Den, but it's not really playing. It's actual Dragon's Den, right? Because if they come up with something great, Rob Moore has this great phrase, to know and not to do is not to know. So really, in order to kind of understand how this all works, you have to do it right. And in order to do it, you have to be with people like you guys. And so we are so grateful that you've come on today to share all this wealth of knowledge, because I know that if people just take a fraction of what you've heard today and apply it, whether that be setting up a SSAS or setting up a limited company or looking into property or just finding people who know their stuff, if you implement just a fraction of this, it can't harm. It's only going to propel you forward, right?
Yeah. And even the point you make about the borrowing, if you're listening to this and like you never had a pension, you were never motivated by it, don't blame you, by the way, right? If somebody's listening and is feeling that and go, well, the fact they haven't got one doesn't mean you're not going to build profit for the future, as you were saying earlier, Kevin, about make your profit and pay money in. But if you're not at that point yet, the fact that you can develop a little bit of SSAS knowledge means that you might know people in other rooms that have these pensions who don't know these changes. And for me, the art of being an entrepreneur, which is creativity and action for profit, that's an entrepreneur. Then if you can find somebody else and share a little bit of knowledge, and I'm more than happy to give the free resources to anybody, then you can solve their problem, because if they hear this podcast, which says, you can lend money and you're the person who could be the receiver of the money, you're actually creating a unique subset of investors that nobody else is even going for. because nobody else knows about
It's
SAS.
exactly what happened here, where Sean came from a school job, public sector, didn't have a private sector pension, so he couldn't transfer it into a SAS. But he could borrow somebody else's SAS, and it allowed him to buy property. Even if you don't have a pension, or you're in the public sector or private sector, and you don't have a pension, or it's not big enough, or it's not something you can transfer, knowing this stuff means you can show other people who do have them how they can grow theirs by lending the money to you. So everybody needs to know this stuff.
It's a win-win-win, right? It's just everybody wins in these situations, and it's what I love about property specifically and progressive, because it's a collaboration, right? It's not competition; it's collaboration. It's a real misconception from people outside of the property world, who think that business is all very cutthroat and as you were saying, hide your homework from other people, and it's just not like that. Hopefully, these conversations will show people that collaboration is the way forward.
It rises all ships.
It rises all ships, absolutely. And on that note, thank you so much for collaborating with us today on this podcast, Kevin. It's been great to have you here. Make some comments down below with any questions that you might have, and we will also get some resources out to you as well, so you can learn more about this stuff.
By the way, if you have a SAS, comment in the chat box about how it is for you, what results you're getting from it, and resources, common resources for any resources.
So if you want to learn more about SAS pensions, make sure to check out the link in the description of the show notes to get Kevin's free resource. And if you want future information and content like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and ding that notification bell. And we look forward to seeing you on a future episode.